My name is Doug Kreiner, and I'm an associate professor in the political science department and also a faculty in residence at Miles Standish Hall. So it's really good to see so many Miles RAs and residents here. Nice to see so many KHC students. If you'd like to come to my open hours and talk about the glories of Stata coding, please feel free. We can rehash that again. So I'll say just a word about the FIR program for those of you that are interested. We're in most of the large residences throughout campus, and once a week we always open our doors and really welcome as many of you as would like to get to know us into it, and we really enjoy the opportunity to get to meet and know you. So if you'd like to meet me or my wife, Jill, who's a professor in the mechanical engineering department, you can do so just by going onto Facebook and joining the Miles FIR group. And every week we'll post when our hours are and what we're going to be doing, and we will be happy to talk to you about anything from Syria to the Seattle Seahawks, and conversations really range pretty much that entire gamut. So, please feel welcome, and I would love to get to know you. So it's my pleasure here tonight to introduce Professor Andrew Bacevich, the chair of the International Relations Department and a professor of IR, history, as well as in the Killeshant Honors College. I can think of few people that are better suited to talk to us about how we find ourselves in the mired in the situation that we are in the Middle East, including right up to present day, than Professor Bacevich. The news media may have forgotten all about our current involvement in Syria, but we are still engaged nonetheless, and so I'm very much looking forward to his talk. Professor Bacevich is a graduate of the United States Military Academy at West Point. He served his country in the Vietnam War. After completing his military service, Professor Bacevich attended Princeton University, where he received his PhD in diplomatic history. Before coming to BU, he also taught at both West Point and Johns Hopkins University. He's the author and editor of many books, including most recently the critically acclaimed Breach of Trust: How Americans Failed Their Soldiers and Their Country. He's an expert on American politics, foreign policy, militarism, and civil-military relations. And thank you so much, Professor Bacevich, for giving of your time here this evening.
Well, that was a tremendously kind introduction, and this is an incredible turnout. I have to say, one of the reasons it's a pleasure for me to be here is because I get to hear my colleagues talk. Like many members of the faculty, we sort of exist in our little teeny universe and don't venture out enough, and this is a way of venturing out and learning myself. So my topic is U.S. foreign policy in the Middle East, the greater Middle East, the Islamic world. And of course, for most of us, it's a story of one damn thing leading to another. And we go from one crisis to the next. The crisis of the moment, of the last several days, is the story of Islamic militants from Somalia taking over a shopping mall in Kenya and killing large numbers of people and holding out. I frankly didn't get to pay much attention to the news today, so I don't know what happened. Just prior to this crisis, the previous crisis was the crisis of Syria, and the President Obama's announced intention to punish the Assad government for its chemical weapons use. That now, for the moment at least, having been put on the shelf, although the president has repeatedly said that, quote unquote, all options remain on the table. Just prior to the Syrian crisis was the Egyptian crisis. You remember the Egyptian army, which the United States had armed and supported for a long time, overthrew a democratically elected government that didn't meet their likings, and then engaged in killing large numbers of the members of the Muslim Brotherhood, innocent civilians, who didn't care for their government being overthrown in a military coup. And of course, all along, for many years now, we've had the ongoing crisis of Afghanistan, and there was the crisis of the Iraq War, and so on. My basic argument tonight is to say that our fixation on these separate crises that never seem to end makes it more difficult for us to see what connects them and to see that there is indeed a larger story. Curiously, the current crisis in Kenya involving Somali militants occurs almost exactly 20 years to the date when U.S. Army Rangers were killed in Mogadishu, when the culmination of a U.S. intervention in Somalia back in 1993. I would argue that although it seems like these are two unrelated crises, they're not. They connect, and they connect as part of a larger story. What's the story? I think the story begins in 1980. We have forgotten, as Americans, as observers of events, we have forgotten that there was a time when the United States was very reluctant to introduce U.S. forces anywhere in the Islamic world. That changed in January of 1980, when President Jimmy Carter, responding both to the Islamic Revolution in Iran and the Soviet intervention in Afghanistan, promulgated the Carter Doctrine. And the Carter Doctrine declared that it was now U.S. policy that the Persian Gulf, an important but geographically relatively small area, that the Persian Gulf had become a vital U.S. national security interest. And that, because the Persian Gulf was a vital U.S. national security interest, the United States would use all means necessary to prevent a hostile power, that was code word for the Soviets, to prevent a hostile power from gaining control of the Persian Gulf. Now, whatever Jimmy Carter actually intended should follow from this statement. In fact, what followed was the beginning of the militarization of U.S. policy, not simply with regard to the Persian Gulf, but with regard to the larger Greater Middle East. And that the aim, ultimately, was not to prevent a hostile power from controlling that region of the world, but was actually something much more ambitious. And I would argue that the real ambition has been to try to ensure that the United States itself is able to determine the future of the Islamic world. Further, I'd argue that in undertaking this proposition, the assumption was, beginning in the 1980s, continuing down to the present day, the assumption was that somehow or other, the adroit use of American hard power, either overtly or covertly, either directly or through proxies, but that somehow or other, the adroit use of American hard power was going to put things right in that part of the world. I'm not trying to tell you this was written down in a document in so many words. I am trying to tell you that in Washington, this is an idea that took hold and became the basis then for an ongoing series of military interventions or of military collaborations, beginning in the early 1980s when Ronald Reagan sent U.S. forces into Beirut, when Ronald Reagan undertook the so-called tanker war, when Ronald Reagan collaborated with Saddam Hussein. No, that can't be true. The United States collaborated? Well, it is true. When the United States collaborated with Saddam Hussein in supporting Saddam Hussein in what was an Iraqi war of aggression against Iran, justified by concern in Washington that Iran posed a greater threat. Through the 1990s, under the administration of George Herbert Walker Bush, who intervened in the first war against Iraq, who intervened in the Balkans in support of, ostensibly in support of Muslims who are being persecuted, launched the intervention in Somalia at the end of 1992, continuing in the administration of Bill Clinton, who intervened in more different places, using more different means for more different purposes than any of his predecessors. And then, in a sense, culminating after the 9/11 attacks with George W. Bush's declaration of a global war on terrorism, which became the basis of an intervention in Afghanistan, which has not ended, an intervention in Iraq, which took 8 years and ended unsuccessfully, and has spawned any number of other military actions on a smaller scale in the region. Now, toward what end? For what purpose? Well, I think the articulated purpose, the justifications have varied. But in general, Washington has hoped through its use of American hard power to bring greater stability to the Islamic world, to end disorder. From time to time, American policymakers have believed that the adroit use of American hard power would also bring democracy to this part of the world, would encourage liberal values, would advance the cause of human rights, or more narrowly of women's rights. And certainly across the board, American policymakers have believed that the adroit use of hard power was going to somehow enhance the standing of the United States and the standing of the American people in the eyes of people living in that part of the world. So what I'm trying to suggest to you is, for well over 30 years, the United States has been engaged in, never naming, but has been engaged in essence, a war for the greater Middle East. And it's time for us to ask this question. How's it going? Is the Islamic world becoming more stable? Doesn't seem like it. Are our efforts promoting in a practical way democracy and liberal values in the Islamic world? Doesn't seem like it. As a consequence of all of our exertions, of all of our sacrifices, of all the expenditure of treasure, is the standing of the United States in the eyes of the people of the Islamic world improving? Do they like us? Seems to me the answer is no. So what's the bottom line? The bottom line is we need to wean ourselves from this expectation that if we simply try a little bit harder, by God, if we would just bomb Syria, that we're going to turn the corner, that somehow things are going to get better, we're going to get things back on track. My conviction is it ain't going to happen. And that therefore my conclusion would be that the militarization of U.S. policy in this region of the world, initiated by the promulgation of the Carter Doctrine back in 1980, has failed. It's an exercise in futility. We need to go back and ask first-order questions with regard to what is the source of instability in that region, what in fact are our interests, what in fact are our moral obligations, and how should we best satisfy those considerations. And simply continuing the war for the greater Middle East is not the answer. So thank you very much. In the back, yes, sir. In the middle back. The half back. The full back.
Hi, so I'm from Kenya, and as you know, the recent attack happened, and I just wanted to know that if you were to pull back, per se, and reevaluate the strategy of the greater Middle East, wouldn't that just show the militants that they've won and make them feel like they have the power to, you know, continue doing what they're doing, and maybe hits like Kenya, hits like Uganda, all these places where they affect innocent people and strike back? Would that not just show them that they've won? And
well, the alternative to an excessively militarized policy is not doing nothing. I mean, it seems to me, were we to be creative, were U.S. First point. It is not within the capacity of the United States, no matter how hard we try, or no matter how much money we spend, no matter how many U.S. forces we deploy, it is not within the capacity of the United States either to understand the sources of upheaval in the Islamic world, nor to direct them or control them. So point number one is, these are huge concerns. It is foolish, it is folly, it is a mistake to look to the United States to somehow sort this out. Ain't going to happen. Now, the United States has been trying to sort things out, if you take my narrative, for a considerable period of time, and my reading of the evidence, you know, different people would disagree, would say it ain't working. So rather than imagining that hard power is the answer, I think we should become more creative in considering other approaches. Now, let me give you one example. I would argue that bringing to the United States for educational experience young people from abroad, on balance, is a heck of a lot better way to spend American national treasure than to send U.S. Marines to Afghanistan. Not because bringing any number of young people from abroad to study in the United States is overnight going to fix the problem. But it seems to me that experience is probably more likely to enhance our image in the world, and quite frankly, the skills, the knowledge that are imparted in the process of education may actually enable people to go back to their homes and internally begin to make a difference. That's one example of what I mean. And you did not hear me say that's the magic solution, because there is no magic solution. Yes. Who else? Yes, right here. And you're next.
Okay, were you trying to say that the goal for this, why they went into the Middle East, was for like a moral obligation?
Nope.
What was it?
No state in history, no great power in history is motivated principally by moral considerations. Moral considerations may, from time to time, figure in the minds of policymakers sort of on the margins. But state behavior is driven by perceived interests. One of the problems with U.S. policy in the Middle East is we have failed to gauge our interests realistically, pragmatically. Instead, we have fancied interests and responded to them that are tended to be misleading. So no, you did not hear me say that moral considerations drive policy.
Well, then, sorry, this might be the SMG inside of me. Is it like monetary? Are we throwing all this money so we can get something back from it? Or do we just want the control? Do we want the base, the area? Do we want the globalization factor? What do we want?
Well, yes to both, okay? But let's focus on the second one. How'd you phrase the second? What do we
just want it as a base, like an area to expand to?
Yes, but more to the point, more to the point. I mean, this gets to the heart of what drives U.S. behavior in the world? And there are many answers to that question. One of the most important drivers, however, is an American self-perception, collective self-perception, who we are, what we stand for, what we represent in the unfolding of history. And what we stand for in our own eyes is that we are the chosen people.
Manifest destiny, right?
That's part of it. But back to the moment when the Massachusetts Bay Colony was founded in 1630, and John Winthrop gathered his followers together on the deck of the good ship Arbella before they came ashore to found Boston, and he delivered a wonderful sermon, basically saying, "Gather together, my friends, and let us consider what we are here to do." And what he said was, God has chosen us. God has chosen us to create a city upon a hill. And this city upon a hill will illuminate the world and transform it. Now, he was a believer speaking to a community of believers. To some extent, we are far more secular people now. But that conviction that we are chosen remains. President Obama, in his speech to the General Assembly today, reiterated, we are exceptional. What makes us different? What is our mission? Now, the whole thing's bogus, right? Yeah. You can read the Bible from front to back. It doesn't say the chosen people are the Americans, right? Yeah. It doesn't say that. But it's something we have come to believe, and it's something we cling to. And therefore, the story I told of a militarized approach to policy in the Middle East that by any measure has failed, we can't admit that. People in Washington cannot admit that American power is actually irrelevant, or at least largely irrelevant, to what's going on in the Middle East. The people of the Middle East are exercising their right to self-determination. They are going to decide what their future are. And they are not going to take any direction or orders from us. But if you're in Washington and you admit that, then in a sense you're admitting we're not different. We're not special. We live in history. And that's unacceptable in American politics.
I'm an ethnic Russian, and I was actually wondering, just knowing that your expertise on the subject, how real was the threat of the Soviet Union kind of exerting its influence and like actually successfully controlling the Middle East in the 1980s when the Carter Doctrine was brought up?
In retrospect, we would say that there was no serious threat. In retrospect, we would say that the Soviets intervened in Afghanistan not because they were intent on using Afghanistan as a base to launch into Iran, toward Iraq, toward Saudi Arabia, but because they feared that developments in Afghanistan threatened the Soviet Empire. And in fact, they did. But that was not the perception in Washington at the time. The perception in Washington at the time was that the Soviets were on the march. They didn't have the capacity to do any significant, indeed, they failed militarily in their effort to pacify Afghanistan.
Thank you.
I'm all done. Thank you very much.